The rain hit Brooklyn like a judgment, slicking the asphalt black and turning the sodium streetlights into halos of dirty orange. Marco Santini wasn't looking for trouble that Tuesday night. He was looking for a quiet walk to clear his head after 12 hours of ledger reviews and territory negotiations that had left his temples throbbing. But trouble found him anyway, the way it always did when you wore a name like Santini in a city that remembered blood feuds like some people remembered birthdays. He heard the shouting first, then saw the girl. She was young, early 20s, maybe, pressed against the brick wall of a shuttered bodega while 3 men in hoodies circled her like sharks. One of them had her purse. Another had his hand on her throat. Marco's instinct was to keep walking. Street fights in Red Hook weren't his jurisdiction, and he'd learned early that a Santini playing White Knight could turn sideways fast. But then the girl's eyes found his through the rain, wide and terrified, and something in his chest twisted. He crossed the street before he could think better of it. "Gentlemen," Marco said, his voice carrying the kind of calm that made smart men nervous. "I think the lady wants to leave." The 3 men turned. The biggest one, shaved head, neck tattoos crawling up to his jaw, grinned with teeth that had seen better days. "You think wrong, suit. Keep walking." Marco didn't keep walking. He stepped closer, close enough that the streetlight caught the line of his jaw and the expensive cut of his coat despite the rain soaking through. Close enough that they could see his eyes, which were the color of cold steel and twice as hard. "Let her go," Marco said. "Now." What happened next was fast and ugly. The big one swung first, telegraphing the punch so badly that Marco almost felt embarrassed for him. He sidestepped, caught the man's wrist, and used his own momentum to slam him face, first into the brick. The second man pulled a knife, a stupid move, bringing a blade to what could have stayed a fistfight, and Marco disarmed him with a precision that spoke of training the streets didn't teach. The knife clattered into a puddle. The third man ran. The girl sagged against the wall, gasping. Marco retrieved her purse from the puddle where it had fallen, shook off the water, and handed it to her. Up close, she was striking. Dark hair plastered to her face, olive skin, eyes the color of whiskey in firelight. Her dress was ruined, mascara tracked down her cheeks, but there was something in the set of her jaw that told him she wasn't the type to stay a victim for long. "You okay?" Marco asked. She nodded, then shook her head, then laughed, a sharp, breathless sound that was half shock. "I don't know, I think so. Thank you, Jesus, thank you. You need a hospital." No, I'm fine. Just," she looked down at herself, at the torn sleeve and scraped palms. "Maybe not fine, but not hospital level." Marco pulled out his phone. "I'll call you a car. I can get my own car. Not in this neighborhood. Not looking like that." He was already dialing, his tone brooking no argument. The car would be there in 4 minutes, one of his drivers, discreet and loyal. "Where do you live?" She hesitated, and in that hesitation Marco saw her calculating, weighing trust against necessity. Finally, "Manhattan, Upper West Side." Of course she did. Marco could smell money on her now that he was paying attention. The designer dress, the leather bag, the way she held herself despite the fear still shaking through her limbs. Rich girl slumming in the wrong neighborhood, probably. It happened. "The car will take you home," Marco said. "No charge." "Why are you helping me?" "Because no one else was." The car arrived, a black sedan with tinted windows that whispered of discretion and power. Marco opened the door for her and she paused on the curb, looking back at him with those whiskey eyes. "What's your name?" she asked. Marco almost lied, should have lied. But something about the way she asked, like his name mattered like he mattered, made him tell the truth. "Marco," he said. "Marco Santini." If the name meant anything to her, she didn't show it. She just nodded, climbed into the car, and was gone into the rain-slicked night. Marco didn't think about her again until the next morning, when Luca burst into his office at the Santini estate without knocking. Luca was his cousin, his consigliere, and the only man Marco trusted to tell him when he was being an idiot. Right now, Luca looked like he'd seen a ghost, his usually olive complexion gone sallow, his hand white-knuckled around a manila folder. "We have a problem," Luca said. Marco leaned back in his leather chair, the morning espresso cooling in his hand. "We have a lot of problems. Which one are you here about?" "The Morty problem." The name landed like a stone in still water. Morty. The rival family that had been circling Santini territory for 3 years, waiting for a sign of weakness, probing for cracks. Marco's father had died 6 months ago, a heart attack, natural causes, but convenient timing for the Mortys who'd been pushing for a sit-down ever since. Marco had refused. You didn't negotiate with jackals. What about them? Marco asked. Luca opened the folder, pulled out a photograph, and laid it on the desk. Marco's blood went cold. It was her, the girl from the street fight. Except in this photo, she was smiling, arms around an older man with silver hair, and a face Marco knew all too well from FBI surveillance photos and his father's warnings. Vincent Morty, Don of the Morty crime family. The man who'd ordered the hit that killed Marco's uncle. The man Marco had sworn to destroy. Who is she? Marco's voice came out flat, dangerous. Isabella Moretti, Luca said. Vincent's daughter, his only child. She was reported missing last night after she didn't come home from a gallery opening in Chelsea. They found her car abandoned in Red Hook with a flat tire. The pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. The neighborhood. The attackers, probably just street trash, but what if they'd been hired? What if someone had known who she was? Marco's hands curled into fists. You saved Vincent Morty's daughter, Luca said quietly. And you gave her your name. The implications were a loaded gun pressed to Marco's temple. If the Mortys found out that Isabella had been in danger on Santini territory, they'd spin it as negligence at best, a setup at worst. If they found out Marco had intervened, if Isabella told them his name, the fragile détente would shatter. There would be war. Does she know who you are? Luca asked. I don't think so. She didn't react to the name. And you're sure she's Morty's daughter? Marco studied the photograph. Same face, same eyes, same defiant set to her jaw. I'm sure. Luca sat down heavily in the chair across from Marco, running a hand through his dark hair. This is bad, Marco. If Vincent finds out one of us was anywhere near his daughter. He won't. Not from me. Marco's jaw tightened. And she doesn't know who I am. She thinks I'm just some guy who helped her out. For now. But what happens when she sees your face on the news? When someone mentions the Santini name and she puts it together? Luca leaned forward. What happens when Vincent finds out and thinks you had something to do with her being in danger in the first place? Marco stood, pacing to the window that overlooked the estate's manicured grounds. Dawn was breaking over the old oaks, turning the morning mist gold. His father had stood at this same window for 40 years, making decisions that kept the family safe, kept them powerful. Marco had inherited the empire, but he wasn't sure he'd inherited the wisdom. We bury it, Marco said finally. No one talks about this. Not our guys, not the driver. And we keep eyes on her, discreet surveillance, just until we know she's not going to be a problem. And if she is a problem, Marco didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because the truth was that he'd looked into Isabella Morty's terrified eyes last night and felt something he hadn't felt in years, something that had no place in his world. Protectiveness, connection, interest. He'd saved his enemy's daughter, and now she was a thread that could unravel everything. The surveillance reports came in over the next 3 days, and they painted a picture Marco found increasingly difficult to reconcile with the monster he'd built up in his head. Isabella Morty wasn't a pampered mafia princess playing at rebellion. She was a graduate student at Columbia, working on a master's degree in art restoration. She volunteered at a youth center in the Bronx 3 times a week. She lived in a modest apartment her father didn't pay for. Marco's people had traced her bank records, found student loans, and a part-time job at a gallery in Soho. She was, by all accounts, trying very hard not to be a Morty. She doesn't know, Luca said on Thursday afternoon, dropping the latest surveillance log on Marco's desk. About the family business. Or she's the world's greatest actress. Marco scanned the report. Isabella had spent the morning in class, the afternoon at the youth center teaching kids how to draw, and the evening at the gallery. No suspicious meetings. No phone calls to her father. No indication that she'd connected the name, Marco Santini, to anything more significant than a good Samaritan who'd happened to be in the right place at the right time. Vincent keeps her clean, Marco said, understanding dawning. She's his insurance, his legitimate legacy. If the empire falls, she's untouchable. Smart, Luca admitted. Cruel, but smart. She probably doesn't even know what he does. Marco thought about that, about growing up in a lie, surrounded by wealth and power, but kept carefully ignorant of how it was earned. His own childhood had been different. His father had brought him to sit-downs at 16, taught him the business with a brutal honesty that left no room for illusions. Marco had chosen this life with his eyes open. Isabella hadn't been given a choice at all. Pull the surveillance, Marco said. Luca blinked. What? You heard me. Pull it. She's not a threat. Marco, she's Vincent Morty's daughter. She's a grad student who got jumped by street trash and happened to run into me. That's all. If we keep watching her and someone notices, it becomes the exact thing we're trying to avoid. Marco stood, decision made. Let it go. Luca studied him with narrowed eyes. You're making a mistake. Probably, Marco agreed. But it's my mistake to make. He thought that would be the end of it. Thought Isabella Moretti would fade back into her separate world, a strange footnote in the ongoing Cold War between their families. Thought he could forget those whiskey eyes and the way she'd looked at him like he was a hero instead of a monster. He thought wrong. She walked into Santini's restaurant on Friday night. Marco was there for a weekly dinner with his mother, a tradition they'd maintained even after his father's death, a small island of normalcy in a life that had none. The restaurant was one of the legitimate businesses, a upscale Italian place in Little Italy that served the best osso buco in New York and had been in the family for 3 generations. Marco's mother, Elena, held court at the corner table like the queen she'd always been, and Marco played the dutiful son, listening to her gossip about cousins and friends and the church renovation fund. Then Isabella walked in. She was with 2 girlfriends, all 3 of them dressed for a night out, laughing about something as the hostess led them to a table near the window. Isabella wore a green dress that brought out the gold in her eyes, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She looked happy, carefree, nothing like the terrified girl from the alley. Marco's mother followed his gaze, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Someone you know? Elena asked, her tone carefully neutral. No, Marco lied. But Isabella looked up at that moment, scanning the restaurant in the absent way people do when they're settling into a new space. Her gaze passed over Marco, moved on, then snapped back. Recognition flared in her eyes, followed by surprise, then something softer. She smiled. Marco's heart did something stupid in his chest. She's coming over, Elena observed, amusement coloring her voice. And you definitely know her. Isabella approached the table with the kind of confidence that came from being raised with money, but there was warmth in her expression that belied any sense of entitlement. Marco Santini. He stood, automatically, the manners his mother had drilled into him overriding every strategic instinct screaming at him to shut this down. Isabella, you remember my name. You made an impression. She laughed, and the sound was genuine, unguarded. I should hope so, considering you saved me from getting mugged, or worse. I've been hoping I'd run into you so I could say thank you properly. That night was, she paused, something vulnerable crossing her face. It was really scary, and you were kind. So thank you. Elena cleared her throat delicately, and Marco realized he'd been staring. This is my mother, Elena Santini, he said. Ma, this is Isabella. A pleasure, Elena said, and Marco could hear the curiosity in her voice, the calculations spinning behind her gracious smile. His mother knew every family in the New York underworld, could recite genealogies like scripture. The name Isabella wouldn't mean anything without a surname, but the moment she got one, I should let you get back to your dinner, Isabella said. But I'm glad I got to thank you. And maybe, she hesitated, then pushed forward with a courage Marco recognized from the alley. Maybe I could buy you a coffee sometime, to properly express my gratitude. Every alarm in Marco's head was screaming. This was insane, dangerous, the exact opposite of letting it go. But he looked into those whiskey eyes and heard himself say, tomorrow. There's a cafe in the village. St. Ambrose, 2:00. I'll be there. Isabella smiled again, brilliant and warm, then returned to her table. Marco sat down slowly, acutely aware of his mother's stare. That, Elena said quietly, is not no one. Who is she, Marco? A girl I helped last week. And nothing. She wants to buy me coffee. Alina's expression said she didn't believe a word of it, but she let it drop with the practiced grace of a woman who'd spent 40 years married to a mob boss. She's lovely, be careful. Marco didn't sleep that night. He lay in his bed in the estate, staring at the ceiling, and tried to logic his way out of the corner he'd backed himself into. He should cancel. Should send Luca with an excuse. Should do anything except show up at that cafe and let this disaster spiral further out of control. But at 1:55 p.m. on Saturday, he walked into St. Ambrose and found Isabella already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cappuccinos waiting. "I ordered for you," she said when he sat down. "I hope that's okay. I figured you for a cappuccino guy. Good guess. I'm an artist, I study people." She wrapped her hands around her cup, studying him with an openness that made Marco feel exposed. "So, Marco Santini, tell me about yourself." "Not much to tell. I run the family business." "Which is?" "Import-export, restaurants, real estate." "All true, technically." "Boring stuff." "You don't seem like a boring stuff kind of guy." "What kind of guy do I seem like?" Isabella considered him, her head tilted. "The kind who doesn't talk about himself. The kind who steps in when someone's in trouble even though it's none of his business. The kind who's dangerous in a way that should scare me but doesn't." Marco's pulse kicked up. "Should it scare you?" "Probably," Isabella said lightly. "But I've never been good at self-preservation. Ask my roommate. Ask my—" She stopped abruptly, something shuddering behind her eyes. "Ask who?" Marco prompted. "My father. He's always telling me I'm too trusting. That the world is more dangerous than I think." She laughed, but there was an edge to it. "He's probably right. I mean, I did end up in an alley in Red Hook at midnight because I thought I could change my own tire." "You could have called someone." "I did. AAA said 2 hours. I was impatient." Isabella took a sip of her cappuccino, and Marco noticed her hands were steady now, no trace of the tremor from that night. "Besides, it worked out. I met you." The conversation flowed easier than it should have. Isabella talked about her classes, about the restoration project she was working on, a damaged Caravaggio at a private collection uptown. Marco found himself talking about his mother, about the restaurant, about growing up in Brooklyn. They avoided the landmines by mutual unspoken agreement. She didn't ask about his family business beyond the surface details. He didn't ask about hers. 2 hours vanished like smoke. "I should go," Isabella said finally, reluctance clear in her voice. "I have a paper due Monday that I've been criminally procrastinating on. Can I see you again?" The words were out before Marco could stop them. Isabella's smile was sunlight breaking through clouds. "I'd like that." They exchanged numbers, made plans for dinner Tuesday night. Marco walked her to the subway, watched her disappear down the stairs, and felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. This was a mistake. He knew it was a mistake, but he couldn't bring himself to care. Luca was waiting for him at the estate, pacing Marco's office like a caged animal. "Are you insane?" Luca demanded the moment Marco walked in. "You were seen with her, at the restaurant. At the cafe, we have people reporting that you're dating Vincent Morty's daughter." "I'm not dating her. We had coffee." "You have dinner plans Tuesday. Don't lie to me, Marco." "I have eyes everywhere, remember?" Luca slammed his hand on the desk. "This is suicide. When Vincent finds out, he won't. He will, and when he does, he's going to think you're playing some kind of game. That you're using his daughter to get to him. Or worse, he'll think you know who she is and you're doing it anyway. Either way, it ends in blood." Marco knew Luca was right. Knew every word was the strategic truth. But the memory of Isabella's smile, her laugh, the way she'd looked at him like he was just Marco and not the Santini heir. "I'll handle it," Marco said. "How? By falling for the enemy's daughter. By starting a war over a girl. By being careful, by keeping it quiet. Marco stopped, hearing how hollow it sounded even to his own ears. Luca's expression softened, which was somehow worse than his anger. "Marco, brother. I know that look, I know what it means. But this can't happen, you know it can't." "I know," Marco said quietly. "I know." But he showed up for dinner Tuesday anyway. They met at a small Thai place in the East Village, the kind of hole-in-the-wall spot where the food was incredible and no one paid attention to who was eating with whom. Isabella wore jeans and a sweater, her hair in a ponytail, and she looked so normal that Marco's chest ached with it. "My father called today," Isabella said halfway through pad thai. "He wanted to know why I haven't been home for Sunday dinner in 3 weeks." Marco's fork paused midway to his mouth. "What did you tell him?" "That I'm busy. That I'm 24 and have my own life." She poked at her noodles, frustration evident in the set of her shoulders. "He doesn't get it. He thinks I should be grateful for everything he's given me. The apartment he wanted to buy, the job offers from his friends, the whole golden cage. You turned them down. All of them. I want to make something of myself that has nothing to do with his money or his connections. Is that naive?" "No," Marco said honestly. "It's brave." Isabella looked up at him, something vulnerable and searching in her gaze. "Can I tell you something? Something I don't tell most people." "Of course. I think my father isn't who he says he is. I think there's this whole other side to his life that he keeps hidden from me. And I think," she stopped, laughing at herself. "God, this sounds paranoid, but I think maybe he's not a good man. That maybe the money and the power came from places I wouldn't like." Marco's blood had gone cold. "What makes you think that?" "Little things. The men who visit the house. The way conversations stop when I walk into a room. Phone calls in Italian that he doesn't translate. And once when I was a kid I saw," she shook her head. "It doesn't matter, I'm probably wrong. Reading too much into things because I've been pulling away and I need to justify it." "What did you see?" Marco asked, though part of him didn't want to know. Isabella was quiet for a long moment. Then, blood on his shirt, and the way his driver looked at me like he was afraid, like I'd seen something I shouldn't have. She met Marco's eyes. "I never asked about it. I think I didn't want to know. But it's there, you know, this question mark that sits between us." Marco wanted to tell her the truth, wanted to lay it all out, who her father was, what he'd done, the bodies buried on Vincent Morty's orders. But he also understood that ignorance was a gift in their world. Once you knew, you couldn't unknow. Once you were in forever. "Maybe some questions are better left unasked," Marco said carefully. "Maybe," Isabella agreed. "Or maybe I'm a coward for not asking them." "You're not a coward. You're someone trying to live a different life than the one handed to you. That takes more courage than you know." They talked until the restaurant closed, then walked through the village streets, and Marco felt the weight of the lies between them growing heavier with every block. He should tell her, should end this before it became something neither of them could walk away from. But when Isabella turned to him at her subway stop and kissed him, tentative and sweet and terrifying in its honesty, Marco kissed her back and told himself he'd deal with the consequences later. Later came sooner than expected. Marco was in his office Wednesday morning when Luca burst in without knocking, his face ashen. "We have a situation." "What kind of situation?" "The kind where someone just tried to kill Vincent Morty." The world tilted. Marco stood slowly, his hands flat on the desk. "What?" "Drive-by shooting. Outside his social club in Queens. Morty's in the hospital. Critical condition." "And Marco?" Luca's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "They're saying it was us." "That's insane. We didn't." "I know we didn't, you know we didn't, but someone made sure it looked like we did. They used our colors, our car type. 3 witnesses are saying they saw the Santini crest on the shooter's ring." Marco's mind raced. This was a setup. Had to be. But who would benefit from a war between the Santinis and the Mortys? And why now? "Where's Isabella?" The question came out before he could stop it. Luca gave him a look. "At the hospital with her father. Where else would she be?" Marco grabbed his coat. "What are you doing?" Luca demanded. "Going to the hospital." "Are you out of your mind? That's Morty territory. His people will kill you on sight." "Then they'll kill me. But I'm not letting Isabella think I had anything to do with this." "She doesn't know you're a Santini." "How would she?" Luca stopped, realization dawning across his face. "Unless someone told her. Unless whoever set this up wants her to know exactly who you are." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Someone had known about Marco and Isabella, had watched them, waited, and then struck at the perfect moment to ensure maximum chaos. The question was who? Marco's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered anyway. "Mr. Santini." The voice was male, smooth, lightly accented. "I hope you're enjoying the fruits of your romance." "Who is this?" Someone who's been watching you make a fool of yourself over Vincent Morty's little princess. Did you really think no one would notice? Did you think your little star-crossed love story would stay secret? A laugh, cold and amused. I've been in this game too long to let an opportunity like that pass by. You shot Vincent. I shot at Vincent. Whether he lives or dies is immaterial. What matters is that his daughter thinks you did it, and that your family will go to war over an attack you didn't order. Chaos is opportunity, Mr. Santini. I'm sure your father taught you that. The line went dead. Marco stood frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear, and understood with perfect clarity that he'd been played. Every moment with Isabella, every coffee and dinner and kiss, had been watched and weaponized. Someone had taken his weakness and turned it into a knife aimed at both families. Who was that? Luca asked. Someone who just started a war. Marco went to the hospital anyway, despite Luca's protests and the security risk and every ounce of tactical sense he possessed. He had to see Isabella, had to explain before someone else got to her first. But he was too late. He found her in the ICU waiting room, surrounded by hard-faced men in expensive suits, Morty soldiers, all of them. Isabella looked hollowed out, her eyes red from crying, her hands twisted together in her lap. When she looked up and saw Marco, the expression that crossed her face was worse than hatred. It was betrayal. You, she breathed, and the word was a condemnation. One of the soldiers moved forward, hand going to his jacket, but Isabella held up a hand. Don't, not here. Marco stepped closer, ignoring the wall of muscle between them. Isabella, please, let me explain. Explain what? That you're Marco Santini, head of the Santini crime family, that you've been lying to me from the moment we met. Her voice was shaking, but her gaze was steady, pinning him like a butterfly to a board. They told me everything, who you are, what your family does, and what you did to my father. I didn't touch your father. Liar, the word cracked out like a whip. They have witnesses, they have evidence. And they have a theory, do you want to hear it? They think you planned this from the start, that you saved me that night to get close, that every coffee, every dinner, her voice broke. They think you seduced me to hurt him, to get information, to humiliate us. That's not true. Marco took another step and 3 guns came out. He stopped, hands raised. Isabella, please, someone set us both up. Someone who wanted exactly this, to turn you against me to start a war. You have to believe me. Why should I believe anything you say? You've done nothing but lie since the moment we met. I lied about who I was. I didn't lie about. Marco stopped, the words too big and too dangerous to say in a room full of her father's soldiers. I didn't lie about what I feel. Something flickered in Isabella's eyes, but it was gone before Marco could name it. Get out. If you're smart, you'll leave New York. Because when my father wakes up, and he will wake up, there won't be anywhere in this city you can hide. Isabella, Gio, Marco went. But as he walked out of the hospital, he caught a glimpse of Isabella's face in the reflection of the glass doors, and what he saw there gave him the first thread of hope. Because underneath the anger and betrayal, underneath the tears and the pain, he saw doubt. She wasn't sure, wasn't completely convinced, and that meant he still had a chance. The war started that night. Morty soldiers hit a Santini warehouse on the docks, burning it to the ground. Santini retaliated by taking out 2 Morty bookies in Tribeca. The violence spiraled, each attack begetting another, and Marco watched his city tear itself apart over a crime he didn't commit. We have to respond, his captains argued in the estate's basement meeting room. We look weak if we don't. We look stupid if we do, Marco countered. This is what they want. Whoever's pulling the strings wants us bleeding each other dry. And who's they? Luca asked. The Russians, the Albanians, some new player trying to claim territory. Marco had been thinking about that. About the voice on the phone, the careful orchestration, the way someone had known exactly when and how to strike. This wasn't opportunistic chaos. This was planned, surgical. I need to talk to Vincent, Marco said. The room erupted in protest. His underboss, Tony, actually laughed. You want to walk into enemy territory and talk to the man whose daughter you seduced, the man who thinks you tried to kill him. If he thinks I did it, he'll want to kill me himself. That gives me an opening to get shot in the head. Maybe, but it's better than bleeding out slow in a war neither of us started. Marco stood, decision made. Set up a meet, neutral territory. I'll go alone. You'll go with backup, Luca said flatly. Alone is suicide. Backup makes it look like an ambush. I need Vincent to hear me out, and he won't do that if I show up with an army. It took 2 days to arrange. 2 days of mounting casualties, and near misses and phone calls with officials who were starting to make noise about federal intervention. 2 days of Marco not sleeping, not eating, turning over every angle and coming back to the same conclusion. He'd been a pawn in someone else's game, and the only way out was to flip the board. The meet was set for midnight Saturday at a warehouse in Newark, neutral territory held by the Longshoremen's Union, which had relationships with both families but loyalty to neither. Marco went alone, as promised, wearing a wire that Luca insisted on and that Marco knew he'd probably have to ditch. Vincent Morty was waiting for him. The older man looked like death warmed over, bandages visible under his shirt, face gray with pain, but his eyes were sharp and hard as diamonds. He was flanked by 4 soldiers, all of them armed, all of them watching Marco like he was a snake that might strike. "You have balls coming here," Vincent said, his voice rough from the breathing tube. "Stupidity or balls? I haven't decided which." "Neither," Marco said. "Desperation. Desperate men do desperate things, like shooting me outside my own club. I didn't shoot you. I have witnesses that say otherwise. You have witnesses who were paid to lie. Think about it, Vincent. Why would I do it? What do I gain from a war with you? My businesses are solid. My territory is secure. The only thing a war does is cost me money and men and bring down heat from the feds." Marco took a step closer, ignoring the way the guns tracked him. "Someone set this up. Someone who benefits from us tearing each other apart. And I suppose you have proof of this conspiracy?" "No, but I have questions. Like why the shooters used a car registered to a shell company that doesn't exist. Or why 3 witnesses all told the exact same story, word for word like they'd been coached. Or why," Marco paused, playing his trump card, "why your daughter was in Red Hook that night." Vincent's expression flickered. "What about my daughter? Her tire was slashed, not punctured. Professional job. Someone wanted her in that alley, in that neighborhood, at that exact time. Someone who knew I'd be walking by." Marco watched understanding dawn in the older man's eyes. "We were both set up, Vincent. Your daughter was bait. I was the hook. And whoever's running this show has been playing us from the start." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the warehouse settling around them. "Why should I believe you?" Vincent asked finally. "Because your daughter does, or at least she wants to. I saw it in her eyes at the hospital. She's smart enough to know something doesn't add up. Don't talk about my daughter." "Why?" "Because you've worked so hard to keep her out of this world. To give her a clean life." Marco's voice hardened. "She knows, Vincent. Maybe not everything, but enough. She sees you more clearly than you think." Vincent's hand moved toward his jacket, and for a moment Marco thought he'd miscalculated, that this would end with a bullet after all. But then the older man pulled out a photograph and slid it across the crate that separated them. It was a surveillance photo of Marco and Isabella at the cafe. But it wasn't from Marco's people. The angle was wrong, the quality too high. Someone else had been watching. "I got this 3 days before I was shot," Vincent said. "No note, no demands, just the photo. Someone wanted me to know my daughter was with a Santini. And you didn't confront her." "I was waiting. Watching, trying to figure out the play." Vincent's jaw tightened. "Then I got shot and it all made sense, or I thought it did." Marco picked up the photo, studying it. "Did you check where it came from?" "Dead end. Mailed from a post office in Midtown. Cash postage. No return address. Security cameras? Nothing useful. Whoever sent it knew what they were doing." They stared at each other across the crate, 2 men who'd been taught to hate each other from birth and found themselves facing the same enemy. 24 hours, Vincent said finally. "You have 24 hours to prove someone else is pulling the strings. After that, photograph or no photograph, I'm coming for you. And if I prove it, then we find who did this and we make them regret it. Together." Vincent stood, wincing at the pain. "But Marco, if you're lying to me, if you hurt my daughter again, there won't be a hole deep enough for you to hide in." Marco met his eyes. "I'm not lying. And I never meant to hurt her." He left the warehouse with more questions than answers, but also with the first real lead he'd had since this nightmare started. Someone had sent Vincent that photograph. Someone who wanted him to know, who wanted to light the fuse but not too early. Someone patient and careful and very, very smart. Marco thought about the voice on the phone, the accent, the smugness. And he thought about the players in New York's underworld who had the skill and the motive to orchestrate something this complex. The answer came to him as he was driving back over the bridge to Brooklyn, and it made a terrible kind of sense. Dmitry Volkov, Russian organized crime. The Bratva had been trying to expand into New York for years, but they'd been blocked by the Italian families who'd carved up the city decades ago. A war between the Santinis and the Mortis would leave a power vacuum, would let the Russians move in while everyone was distracted. Marco called Luca from the car. I need everything we have on Dmitry Volkov. Movements, associates, businesses, everything. The Russian. Marco, what does he have to do with? Everything. He has everything to do with this. The information came together over the next 12 hours. Volkov had been in New York for 6 weeks, unusual, since he usually operated out of Brighton Beach and let his lieutenants handle Manhattan. He'd been seen at several high-level meetings with suppliers who worked with both Santini and Morty operations. And 3 days before Vincent was shot, he'd purchased a warehouse in Red Hook. Where Isabella's car had been sabotaged. Marco brought the information to Vincent with 6 hours left on his deadline. They met again at the Newark warehouse, but this time Marco came with Luca and Vincent brought his consigliere. The mood was cautiously cooperative rather than openly hostile progress, Marco supposed. Volkov's been setting up shop, Marco explained, spreading photos and documents across the crate. He's got legitimate businesses as fronts, but underneath it's all trafficking and protection rackets. He's been waiting for an opening to move into our territories. So he creates the opening, Vincent said, studying the evidence. By making us go to war with each other. Exactly, and he used your daughter to make it personal, to make sure you'd go nuclear instead of asking questions. Vincent's face darkened. Where is he now? Brighton Beach. But he's moving product through a warehouse in Queens tomorrow night. Big shipment, probably trying to get it secured before we figure out the play. Then we hit him there, Vincent said. Hard, make an example. Agreed. But we do it smart. We need proof before we move. If we hit Volkov without evidence and we're wrong, we've just started a war with the Russians instead. They spent the next 3 hours planning. It felt strange, working with Vincent Morty, the man Marco had been raised to hate. But there was an efficiency to it, an understanding born of similar training and similar stakes. They both knew this world, knew its rules and its prices. What about Isabella? Marco asked as they were wrapping up. Does she know you're here, that we're working together? No, and she's not going to until this is resolved. Vincent's expression was hard. You stay away from my daughter, Santini. I don't care what you feel or what she feels. This can't happen. With respect, that's not your decision to make, or mine, it's hers. She's 24, she doesn't know what she wants. She knows exactly what she wants. You've just been too busy protecting her to notice she doesn't need protecting anymore. Marco held Vincent's gaze. I love her. I know I shouldn't. I know it's complicated and dangerous and probably impossible. But I'm not walking away unless she tells me to. Vincent was silent for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a rough, pained sound. You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the dumbest. I haven't decided which. I've been hearing that a lot lately. They hit Volkov's warehouse at 2 a.m. Tuesday morning with a combined force of Santini and Morty soldiers, strange bedfellows united by common cause. Marco had brought a contact at the FBI, an agent who owed his family a favor and who'd agreed to stay back until there was something concrete to arrest Volkov for. The warehouse was exactly what they'd expected, shipping containers full of black market pharmaceuticals, weapons, and false bottom crates hiding cash and documents. Enough to put Volkov away for life, if they could connect him to it. They found him in the office on the 2nd floor, surrounded by his own soldiers. The firefight was brief and brutal. Marco took a bullet to the shoulder, clean through. Luca assured him later, nothing vital hit. Vincent's men secured Volkov, and Marco's FBI contact came in with enough federal agents to make the arrest stick. Volkov was still smirking as they cuffed him. You think this changes anything? You think you've won? You started a war between two families and failed, Marco said. I'd call that losing. I failed because you got lucky, because you fell for the girl and couldn't let it go. Volkov's gaze was sharp, calculating. But that weakness is still there, Santini. And next time, someone will exploit it better than I did. They took him away, and Marco stood in the warehouse surrounded by broken glass and spent shell casings and the strange alliance he'd forged with his father's enemy, and wondered if Volkov was right. If loving Isabella was a weakness that would eventually get them both killed. Vincent found him on the loading dock, staring out at the pre-dawn skyline. You should get that shoulder looked at, Vincent said. It can wait. They stood in silence, and Marco was aware of the strangeness of the moment, two mob bosses who should be enemies, united by a threat and separated by a girl. She was asking about you, Vincent said finally. Wanted to know if the rumors were true, that we were working together. What did you tell her? The truth, that you were right about Volkov, that you saved both our families from a war we didn't start. Vincent paused. And that despite everything, despite who you are and who she is, you're not the enemy I thought you were. Is that your blessing? Don't push your luck, Santini. But there was something almost warm in Vincent's voice. Talk to her. Let her make her own choice. But if you hurt her, you'll kill me, I know. No, if you hurt her, she'll kill you, and I'll help her hide the body. Marco found Isabella at her apartment 3 hours later, after he'd gotten his shoulder stitched and cleaned up enough to be presentable. She answered the door in sweatpants and a Columbia t-shirt, her hair in a messy bun, and she looked at him with eyes that held equal parts anger and hope. My father called, she said. Told me everything. Can I come in? She stepped aside, letting him into the small apartment that smelled like coffee and paint thinner. Art supplies covered every surface, canvases leaning against walls, brushes soaking in jars, the organized chaos of a working artist. Why didn't you tell me? Isabella asked, her back to him as she stared out the window. From the beginning, why didn't you just tell me who you were? Because I thought if you knew, you'd look at me the way everyone else does. Like I'm just the name, just the legacy. Marco stepped closer. And because by the time I realized I should tell you, I was already in too deep to know how. Too deep in what? In love with you. Isabella turned, and there were tears on her cheeks. That's not fair. You can't just... You lied to me, Marco, about everything. Not about how I feel. Not about wanting to know you, the real you, not Vincent Morty's daughter. Not about any of it mattering. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. I know it's complicated. I know our families have history. But I also know that what I feel when I'm with you is the most honest thing in my life. This can't work. You know it can't. It's working right now. For how long? Until the next crisis. Until someone else decides we're a convenient target. Isabella pulled her hand away. I can't live like that, Marco. Always looking over my shoulder. Always wondering if the next threat is coming from your world or my father's or somewhere I can't even see. Then don't. Come into my world. Really come in, eyes open, knowing everything. Marco caught her face in his hands. Or I'll leave. I'll walk away from all of it, the family, the business, everything. For you, I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking, I'm offering. They stood there in her apartment while the sun rose over Manhattan, two people caught between the lives they were born into and the life they wanted to build. And then Isabella kissed him, fierce and desperate and certain. I'm not asking you to leave, she said against his mouth. I'm asking you to stay and to let me in, all the way in, no more lies. No more secrets. No more secrets, Marco promised. It wasn't easy. The next 6 months were a negotiation between families, between old grudges and new alliances. Vincent and Marco maintained an uneasy peace, bound by mutual respect, and the woman they both loved in different ways. The other families watched, waited, testing the new dynamic for weakness. Isabella moved in with Marco at the estate, started learning the business from the inside. She sat in on meetings, asked difficult questions, and slowly built her own place in a world that had never had room for someone like her. Someone who hadn't been raised in the life but chose it anyway, clear-eyed and unafraid. She was in the office the day the FBI came with questions about the Volkov operation. Sat beside Marco as he gave his carefully worded statement, her hand steady in his. She was there when rival families tested their borders, when deals went sideways, when the cost of the life became clear in bodies and blood. And she stayed. 6 months became a year became 2. Marco proposed at the restaurant where they'd first met again, the same corner table where his mother had first seen them together. Elena cried. Vincent looked like he wanted to object, but didn't, just pulled his daughter into a hug and whispered something that made her laugh. The wedding was a spectacle, a merger of 2 dynasties, blessed by priests and witnessed by both sides of a family tree that had spent decades trying to cut each other down. FBI agents watched from unmarked cars. Reporters camped outside the church. The city held its breath, waiting for disaster. But Marco stood at the altar and watched Isabella walk down the aisle in vintage lace, her father at her side. And he understood that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was choose love in a world built on violence, was to save someone from a street fight and follow where that moment led, through lies and betrayal and the long, hard work of trust rebuilt. Isabella reached the altar, took his hands, and smiled. The same smile from that first night, when she'd looked at him like he was a hero instead of a monster. "You saved me," she said, too quiet for anyone else to hear. "You saved me back," Marco answered. And in the front row, Vincent Morty and Elena Santini sat side by side, ancient enemies turned family, and watched their children forge something new from the ruins of old wars. The priest asked if anyone objected. No one did. The city exhaled. And Marco Santini kissed his wife while the whole complicated, dangerous, beautiful world watched.